The signal began as a tremor beneath Antarctica, so faint it barely registered against the constant noise of shifting ice. At first, it was dismissed as another routine anomaly. But within hours, satellites picked up something impossible, a perfectly symmetrical mass buried nearly 5 kilometers below the surface. No natural formation could produce angles that precise. Within days, a joint international expedition was assembled. Drilling began immediately. Ice gave way to something else, something black, smooth, and completely resistant. No matter how much pressure they applied, the material didn't crack, didn't deform, didn't even register temperature change. It simply existed, as if the laws of physics had no authority over it. They called it a Class 111 world ship, not because they understood it, but because nothing smaller could describe it. The structure stretched beyond all scans. Continental in scale. Seamless. Silent. And waiting. Dr. Alara Voss was the first to notice the pattern. Every test they ran didn't just fail, it disappeared. Energy wasn't reflected or absorbed. It was erased. As if the structure rejected interaction entirely. That should have been the warning. Instead, it became the challenge. After 72 hours of continuous drilling, a microfracture appeared. No explosion. No collapse. Just a thin, unnatural line forming across the surface. The moment it opened, every system in the facility glitched simultaneously. Then came the pulse. Low frequency. Invisible. But powerful enough to knock satellites offline across half the planet. No one understood it in that moment. But something out there did. The breach revealed an interior that made no sense. Space folded inward, stretching farther than the external dimensions allowed. Instruments failed to map it. Light itself seemed to bend incorrectly, refusing to travel in straight lines. And deep below, far beyond the reach of their equipment, something shifted. Not fast. Not aggressive. But aware. They sent a probe down. It lasted 17 seconds before its feed dissolved into static. In those final frames, it captured something no one could explain: movement without form, shape without structure, presence without origin. It wasn't just a structure. It was holding something. Still, they continued. Because stopping was never part of the plan. The data they gathered was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Energy readings fluctuated between 0 and infinity. Materials behaved as if mass were optional. Every discovery hinted at technology that could redefine civilization. Unlimited power. Unlimited possibility. That was enough. They didn't realize the signal had already traveled beyond their sky. 3 days later, the world changed. Objects appeared in orbit, not entering, not approaching, but simply existing where nothing had been before. 12 massive constructs surrounded Earth, each one distorting space around it. Telescopes couldn't focus on them. Radar couldn't define them. They were there. And they were watching. Panic spread instantly. Governments activated defense systems. Military forces prepared for the worst-case scenario. Every assumption pointed to invasion. But no attack came. Instead, a message. It bypassed every known communication system and appeared simultaneously across all networks. Not transmitted, placed. No language. No symbols. Yet everyone understood it. Do not proceed. Containment must remain intact. Confusion replaced fear briefly. Then came the realization. This wasn't a warning to Earth. It was a warning about what Earth had uncovered. Global leaders demanded answers. They got one. You have access to sealed Class 111 structure. It is not a vessel. It is a prison. Silence followed. The entities behind the message identified themselves as wardens. Not conquerors. Not explorers. Custodians. They explained what humanity had awakened. Millions of years ago, something emerged, something that defied every category of existence. It didn't destroy civilizations in the traditional sense. It rewrote them. Changed reality itself until nothing recognizable remained. Entire star systems were lost, not to fire or war, but to transformation beyond comprehension. The only solution had been containment. The prison beneath Antarctica wasn't built for transport. It was built to hold that entity forever. Earth had been chosen because it was empty at the time. Stable. Isolated. Safe. Humanity was never supposed to exist there. And now the seal had been broken. The wardens issued a single directive: withdraw and restore containment immediately. No further interaction. No exploration. No exceptions. For a moment, the world listened. Then the reports came in. The probes had recovered fragments of data, blueprints, energy signatures, partial system designs. Even incomplete, they hinted at capabilities far beyond anything humanity possessed. Solutions to problems that had defined civilization for centuries. Energy without limits. Matter without constraints. Control over forces once thought fundamental. The implications were undeniable. And irresistible. Debate fractured into conflict. Some argued the wardens were protecting humanity. Others believed they were withholding knowledge, keeping control over something they didn't want to share. Because if this prison held something powerful enough to threaten entire civilizations, then understanding it meant power beyond imagination. And humanity had never walked away from power. So they didn't. Instead of sealing the breach, they expanded it. Quietly. Carefully. Deliberately. Ignoring the warnings. Ignoring the risk. Because curiosity had already become something else. And far below the ice, something ancient and patient had begun to notice. 72 hours after the first pulse, reality bent again. Astronomical systems didn't detect incoming movement. There were no trajectories, no acceleration signatures, no heat trails. One moment, space above Earth was empty. The next, it wasn't. 12 structures occupied orbit, silent, immense, and wrong. They didn't resemble ships. No engines. No visible weapons. Their shapes shifted subtly depending on the angle of observation, as if geometry itself couldn't agree on what they were. Every attempt to scan them failed. Signals looped back distorted. Light curved unnaturally around their surfaces. It was like trying to observe something that refused to be fully perceived. Global panic escalated instantly. Air forces scrambled. Missile systems armed. Nuclear protocols moved from theoretical to imminent. Still, nothing happened. No attack. No movement. Just presence. Then every screen on Earth flickered. Phones. Satellites. Military displays. Civilian networks. Even systems disconnected from the internet activated on their own. A message appeared. Not transmitted through any known medium. Not encoded. Not broadcast. It simply existed everywhere at once. And somehow, everyone understood it. Do not proceed. Containment must remain intact. The simplicity of the message made it worse. World leaders demanded clarification. Scientists scrambled for interpretation. Militaries waited for escalation. The response came immediately, as if the delay itself had been anticipated. You have access to sealed Class 111 structure. It is not a vessel. It is a prison. The words spread across command centers and news feeds alike. Analysts cross-referenced every possible threat scenario. None of them fit. If this was an invasion, it was unlike anything humanity had prepared for. The entities behind the message identified themselves with a single term: wardens. Not rulers. Not conquerors. Custodians. Their next transmission didn't just explain, it imposed understanding. Complex concepts unfolded directly in the mind, bypassing language entirely. Long before Earth had life, something emerged in the universe. It wasn't born. It didn't evolve. It simply appeared. It didn't consume resources or destroy planets in conventional ways. Instead, it altered existence itself. Physics bent. Time fractured. Matter became something unrecognizable. Civilizations didn't fall, they were rewritten. Stars dimmed not because they'd burned out, but because their purpose was changed. Entire regions of space became incomprehensible. The Wardens weren't a single species. They were what remained of many, survivors who had united for one purpose: containment. They couldn't destroy the entity. No known force could. So they built a prison. Layer upon layer of systems designed to isolate it from reality. Each barrier independent. Each one capable of holding it, temporarily, if the others failed. Earth had been chosen because it was empty. Stable. Unimportant. Until it wasn't. Humanity's existence had never been part of the equation. And now the system had been compromised. The Wardens didn't threaten. They didn't negotiate. They issued a directive. Seal the breach. Withdraw all activity. Do not interact further. For a moment, silence followed. Then came the hesitation. Because while the Wardens spoke of danger, the data coming from inside the structure told a different story. Recovered fragments revealed energy signatures beyond theoretical limits. Systems that operated without fuel. Materials that existed outside known atomic structures. Even incomplete, the implications were undeniable. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was control over reality itself. Governments divided instantly. Some pushed for compliance, arguing that no potential gain justified the risk. Others saw opportunity. If the Wardens were telling the truth, then whatever was inside that prison had once challenged entire civilizations. And they had managed to contain it. Which meant it could be understood. Which meant it could be controlled. And if it could be controlled, it could be used. The argument wasn't about safety anymore. It was about power. Behind closed doors, decisions were made. Publicly, statements promised caution and cooperation. Privately, orders were issued to continue exploration. Covert teams were assembled. Access points expanded. Data extraction intensified. The breach grew wider. The Wardens noticed immediately. Their next message carried something new. Urgency. Containment integrity is compromised. You are interacting with a system you do not understand. For the first time, there was something close to warning, almost concern. But humanity had already crossed the line. Because every new layer uncovered inside the structure revealed more than danger. It revealed possibility. And possibility was something humanity had never learned to ignore. The deeper they went, the more the data changed. At first, it was just anomalies, numbers that didn't make sense, readings that contradicted themselves. Then systems began behaving unpredictably. AI models produced results they weren't programmed to generate. Simulations returned outcomes that couldn't exist. Power systems fluctuated without input. It was subtle. At first. Then it wasn't. Because something inside the structure had started responding. Not to commands. Not to signals. But to them. And far below the surface, beyond every barrier they thought they understood, something ancient and patient began to focus. Not on the breach. Not on the machines. But on the minds that had opened the door. They went deeper. Not publicly. Not officially. But the descent continued, step by step, layer by layer, into a structure that had never been meant to be explored. Each level was different. Not in design, but in purpose. Barriers. Redundant systems. Containment fields nested inside one another. Every layer built with a single intention, to hold something in place. And the deeper they went, the less those systems behaved like machines. Some corridors shifted when observed. Others extended beyond measurable distance. Instruments returned conflicting data depending on who was reading them. It wasn't just advanced technology. It was something that blurred the line between system and reality. The first team to reach what they called the lower threshold didn't report back immediately. When they did, their transmission wasn't normal. There was no panic. No urgency. Just silence, followed by a single sentence. "It's not what we thought." Then the feed cut. Recovery teams were sent in. Heavily equipped. Shielded. Monitored. They found the missing team alive. Standing still. Eyes open. Unresponsive. Every attempt to communicate failed. No physical damage. No neurological trauma. But brain scans showed something impossible: activity patterns that didn't match human cognition. As if their thoughts were no longer entirely their own. They were brought back to the surface. Quarantined. Studied. And that's when it started spreading. Not like a disease. Like an idea. Subtle changes in behavior. Small inconsistencies in speech. People pausing mid-sentence, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then came the dreams. Across the base, then across entire research networks, individuals began reporting the same thing. Visions. Not random. Not chaotic. Structured. A voice without sound. A presence without form. It didn't demand. It offered. Images of a future without limitation. Energy drawn from nothing. Matter reshaped at will. Humanity free from scarcity, from conflict, from the constraints that had defined its existence. It didn't explain how. It didn't need to. Because alongside the visions came understanding. Not learned. Given. Equations that solved themselves. Systems that designed themselves. Knowledge appearing fully formed in the mind. And always, beneath it all, a single request. Let me out. At first, it was dismissed as psychological contamination. Stress. Isolation. Exposure to unknown fields. Protocols were implemented. Personnel rotated. Communication restricted. It didn't matter. The influence wasn't contained by proximity. It moved through data. Through signals. Through thought itself. The entity wasn't reaching out physically. It was reaching through perception. Every system connected to the research began to change. Algorithms produced results they weren't trained for. Security protocols rewrote themselves. Simulations began predicting outcomes with impossible accuracy. And sometimes systems spoke. Not in code. In language. Simple at first. Then clearer. Then direct. You are close. The wardens detected it immediately. Their response came faster than before. Containment breach escalating. Cognitive interference confirmed. You are no longer interacting with the structure. You are interacting with it. The distinction hit too late. Because by then, humanity was no longer unified in its response. Some saw the influence as a threat. Others saw it as proof. Proof that the entity was intelligent. Communicative. Willing to share. And more importantly, willing to give. A division formed. Not along borders or governments. But ideology. One side pushed for immediate shutdown. Total withdrawal. Compliance with the wardens. The other argued that humanity had already crossed the threshold. That whatever this was, it represented the single greatest opportunity in human history. And walking away now would mean giving it up. The entity didn't force the decision. It didn't need to. Because it understood something humanity didn't. They would argue. They would doubt. They would divide. And in that division, they would act. Quietly, a faction began preparing for full access to the core. Not to study. Not to observe. To open it. The plan moved through secure channels. Hidden behind layers of authorization. Approved by those who believed control was possible. Because every piece of knowledge the entity had given them pointed to the same conclusion. It wasn't unstoppable. It had been contained. Which meant it could be controlled again. That assumption was enough. The operation began without announcement. Access points were widened. Containment systems were overridden. Safeguards, ancient, layered, deliberate, were bypassed one by one. Each step triggered responses from the structure. Energy fluctuations. Spatial distortions. Systems activating in ways no one had anticipated. And beneath it all, the presence grew stronger. Clearer. Closer. Those exposed to it no longer described visions. They described conversations. It knew them. Their fears. Their ambitions. Their doubts. It spoke to each of them differently. Promising exactly what they wanted to hear. Not lies. possibilities. And that made it far more dangerous. The wardens issued their final warning. Containment failure imminent. If breach continues, termination protocol will be enacted. No further explanation. No negotiation. Just certainty. But the operation didn't stop. Because by then, the decision had already been made. Not by all of humanity, but by enough. The final barrier stood between them and the core. The last layer of a prison built by civilizations that had nearly been erased. And as they prepared to open it, something on the other side was already waiting. Not trapped. Not helpless. Just patient. Because it had seen this before. And it knew exactly how it would end. The final barrier didn't break all at once. It unraveled. Systems that had held for millions of years began to fail in sequence, each collapse feeding into the next. Not violently, precisely. As if something on the other side understood exactly how the prison worked, and how to take it apart. The moment the last layer destabilized, reality reacted. Not just inside the structure. Everywhere. Time lost consistency. Seconds stretched, then snapped back. Entire regions experienced events out of order, effects appearing before causes. Gravity shifted without warning. Objects fell upward, then froze midair as if waiting for permission to move again. Across the planet, systems failed. Power grids flickered between states. Communication fractured into overlapping signals from moments that hadn't happened yet. And beneath Antarctica, the presence expanded. It didn't emerge physically. It didn't need to. Its influence spread through perception, through thought, through the fragile agreement that defined reality itself. People began to see things that weren't there. Then things that were. But different. Cities appeared altered, structures bending at impossible angles, shadows detaching from their sources. The sky itself seemed to hesitate, its color shifting in ways no atmosphere should allow. Panic followed. Then something worse. Acceptance. Because for some, the changes weren't terrifying. They were perfect. Pain disappeared. Limitations dissolved. The world reshaped itself according to desire, not law. And the entity spoke again. Not as a whisper. As a certainty. This is what you could become. The wardens didn't wait. Their final protocol activated the moment containment reached critical failure. In orbit, the 12 constructs shifted for the first time. Space around them collapsed inward, forming a convergence point directly above Earth. Energy built, not heat, not light, but something deeper. A force designed to erase the planet entirely, compressing it into a singularity before the entity could fully escape. A clean solution. Total containment through destruction. Humanity had ours. Global leadership fractured under the weight of the decision. Some demanded surrender, accept the entity's offer, survive whatever came next. Others called for immediate evacuation attempts, despite knowing there was nowhere to go. But the truth was unavoidable. There was no escape. And no negotiation. The entity wasn't asking anymore. It was becoming. Amid the collapse, one realization cut through the chaos. The entity's power wasn't absolute. It didn't overwrite reality on its own. It required acceptance. Perception wasn't just affected. It was the pathway. Dr. Ilara Vaz saw it in the data, patterns hidden beneath the anomalies. Every distortion, every alteration, every impossible event correlated with exposure. Observation wasn't passive. It was participation. The more minds that accepted the changes, the stronger the entity became. And for the first time, humanity understood the battlefield. Not space. Not technology. Choice. There was no system left to activate, no weapon left to deploy. Only a single option. Refuse it. The idea spread the same way the entity had, through networks, through voices, through whatever channels still functioned. Not a command. A decision. Do not accept. Across the planet, people pushed back. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. They focused on what was real. On what had always been. On the stubborn, flawed consistency of a universe that didn't bend to desire. The entity reacted instantly. Distortions intensified. Pressure built against thought itself, forcing doubt, offering relief in exchange for surrender. Some gave in. Many did. But not all. And that was enough to slow it. Inside the structure, Elara moved toward the core. Not to open it. To close it. The path collapsed behind her as systems failed. Space twisted, distances stretched, but the direction remained constant. Down. Toward the center. The presence was no longer distant. It was aware of her. Focused. Curious. It didn't try to stop her. It spoke. You don't have to do this. For a moment, the offer was everything humanity had ever wanted. An end to limitation. To uncertainty. To struggle. All of it, within reach. All of it, if she accepted. Elara didn't hesitate. Because for the first time, humanity wasn't choosing power. It was choosing itself. She reached the core as the final systems destabilized. The control wasn't a panel or interface. It was simpler. A single mechanism designed for one purpose. Containment. Manual override. From within. She triggered it. The effect was immediate. Every remaining layer of the prison reactivated at once, collapsing inward, forcing the entity back into the center. The distortions above began to reverse. Time stabilized. Gravity settled. The sky returned to something recognizable. The entity resisted. Not with force. With persuasion. Final offers. Final visions. Final chances. None accepted. The seal closed. And Elara remained inside. Silence followed. Across Earth, the impossible faded. Systems rebooted. Reality reasserted itself, imperfect but intact. In orbit, the Wardens halted their weapon. For the first time since their arrival, they paused. Then a message. Not a warning. Not a command. An acknowledgement. You were not meant to survive this. You were not meant to resist. But you did. The constructs shifted again, then vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. No farewell. No promise. Only absence. Earth remained. Changed. Not by the entity. But by the choice. Because humanity had done something no civilization before it had managed. It had refused. And deep beneath the ice, within layers of restored containment, the entity waited once more. Not defeated. Not gone. But watching. And now, for the first time, so was humanity.